So today I want to talk about Activision Blizzard, sexual harassment, and labor rights. Content warning, this video is going to touch on the topics of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and suicide, so please do be advised if you do indeed decide to continue going forward in this video. That said, I am going to spend some time outlining what has transpired over the past 2 weeks in the situation involving Activision Blizzard, which I will continue to just call Blizzard for the sake of brevity. The situation is actually years in the making, but reaches its head on July 20th when the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in the state of California filed a lawsuit against Blizzard for the mistreatment of its employees, specifically women. A lot of this involves inequitable pay, racism, and sexual harassment. So I want to start off by highlighting some parts of the lawsuit, and then highlight and go over some of the responses to said lawsuit. So I will be spending a significant amount of time talking about and reading from documentation from the company and its employees. So with that said, let's jump in and read some of this court document and see what's transpired in Blizzard over the past few years. So I've started in between and in parts of this document. Most of the earlier stuff talks about inequitable pay, but this kind of goes into more of what transpired within that and the types of sexual harassment that employees faced. But this is just the surface of it, and this is already starting at point 36 within the document. In another example, a female employee who worked at Blizzard Entertainment was assigned to a lower level, denied equal pay, and passed over for a promotion despite multiple factors that suggested that she earned it, namely highly rated performance reviews. She generated significantly more revenue in her marketing campaigns than her male counterpart, and she ran almost twice as many campaigns as her male counterpart. Despite her accomplishments, her male counterpart was invited to have monthly or weekly one-on-one meetings with the vice president. She was not afforded those same opportunities and unsurprisingly was passed over for a promotion in favor of her male counterpart. Similarly, other female employees at Blizzard Entertainment were assigned to lower-level roles, denied equal pay, and further delayed or passed over for promotions in favor of male counterparts, who lacked the same experience or qualifications, but who were friends with the male head of the unit. A newly promoted male supervisor delegated his responsibilities to his now female subordinates in favor of playing Call of Duty. Other male supervisors would refuse to communicate with female employees, going to their male counterparts for information. And this is a quite common thing that happens in a lot of organizations. And for this one particular supervisor, he decided to play video games instead of doing work, passing it all on to the women who were under his employment. And this is something that often happens in a lot of companies where, because of this idea of male bonding, people can become friends with the higher-ups in their organizations who are primarily white men, of course, and that ends up establishing a certain camaraderie and bond that a lot of people don't really like to talk about. But it ends up creating instances where their friendship ends up leading to beneficial and preferential treatment over women that are within the same employment. And this isn't even touching on what women experience outside of that. Female employees at Activision Publishing were also assigned to lower-level roles, denied equal pay, and passed over for promotions of their male counterparts. As an example, a female human resources employee at Activision Publishing was delayed and passed over for a promotion despite receiving positive performance reviews, doing substantially more work than her male counterpart, and taking over the actual responsibilities of the departing person. Female accounting employees at Activision Publishing likewise note that male counterparts were paid significantly more than them, despite doing the same or less work and having less responsibilities. Female employees were also not promoted because of the defendant's discriminatory practices against pregnant female employees. A female employee working on one game team had assumed some of the responsibilities of a manager, but when she asked her male supervisor about being fairly paid for the work she was actually doing and promoted into the position, the manager commented that they could not risk promoting her as she might get pregnant and like being a mom too much. In general, female employees were further treated negatively due to their pregnancies. Supervisors ignored medical restrictions given to female employees and gave them negative evaluations when they were out on maternity leave. Other female employees reported that they were criticized for leaving to pick up their children from daycare when their male counterparts were playing video games, and female employees were kicked out of lactation rooms so employees could use the room for meetings. And this is another set of disturbing trends where you end up seeing instances where women are denied access to getting promotions because of the presumption that they will become pregnant and will take maternity leave. Many women are incentivized not to take maternity leave because of these same practices. And the assumption, of course, is that men wouldn't want to take paternity leave or have access to it, when in fact that is something that a lot of men do want access to be able to stay at home and take care of their children. But of course, this all falls on women as the caretakers of children. And given that societal position, a lot of the women who did have to pick up their children from daycare were penalized, while the men in the employment of the company were sitting around playing video games, and that wasn't seen as an issue. Further, lactation rooms are very important if you have to pump or you have to breastfeed, so that you can actually take care of and feed your child. And of course, that is looked at as something frivolous and something to be ignored. And that is exactly what seems to have transpired here. Now, women of color were particularly vulnerable targets of the defendant's discriminatory practices. An African-American employee noted that it took her 2 years to be made a permanent employee, while men hired after her were made permanent employees. Anytime you end up with these cases, racism is always going to exacerbate what transpires. Women of color will always experience things worse than white women, and will exacerbate the sexism and racism that they experience. That is part of the intersectional experience, where things that affect white women may in fact not translate directly into what women of color experience, and what men of color experience may not directly translate to what women of color experience as well, as they deal with the combination of it and their own unique experience, and this is well understood through intersectional theory. She was micromanaged, such that her male coworkers were known to be playing video games without any intervention by her supervisor, but her supervisor would call and check on her if she took a break to go on a walk. Another African-American employee who worked on information technology was similarly micromanaged by her manager, unlike the men on her team. When she requested time off of work, her manager made her write a one-page summary of how she would spend that time off of work when no one else had to do any such write-ups. And this just reeks of a power trip, honestly. It's the kind of thing that just seems kind of absurd to force somebody to have to do. You have to give me a one-page summary of what you want to do with your time off. Meanwhile, there are people literally playing video games in the office. The male supervisor also criticized her body language, despite male counterparts slouching in meetings. And that's quite another common thing that happens to women of color, where they're seen as having, quote, an attitude problem based on their body language. That is something that happens far too often in a lot of these types of employment. However, of course, the men slouching in meetings and other such things are completely ignored and pushed to the side. She was scolded for asking for assistance while others could get help on similar tasks without the same criticism, and these experiences led female employees to leave their employment, meaning that the environment was hostile enough that people actively left. And that, of course, privileges people who were allowed to play video games for their job rather than actually doing their job, and makes it so that women in this hostile environment felt like they had to leave. Now, as a result of these discriminatory pay assignments, promotions, and other practices, defendants' gender pay gap is significant. The defendants paid female employees significantly less in base pay and total compensation than their male counterparts, and the pattern and practice of violations were continuing. When women complained about the lack of equal employment opportunities, especially in comparison to their male counterparts, their complaints fell on deaf ears or were met with an empty promise and to investigate the issue. Indeed, despite having retained a bunch of lawyers to allegedly provide analysis related to compensation data, defendants failed to take effective action and reasonable steps to prevent pay discrimination. as the pay disparity between male and female employees was not remedied and continued. As a result of these discriminatory practices, female employees were forced to leave. For example, female employees noted that they accepted less compensation than they were making in their prior employment or offered by other companies to work for defendants with the hollow promise that they would get promoted and get compensation. They never made up the ground and instead had to watch as their male counterparts were promoted and more quickly offered more compensation, forcing them to have to leave the company. So in a lot of ways, part of this lawsuit could actually be that they deserve the made-up pay that would have been equal and comparable to their male employees, as well as any sort of compensation to make up the difference after they were forced to leave. Because, again, this hostile environment is what forced them to leave, not their inability to perform in their job. In fact, it seems that they went above and beyond the duty compared to their counterparts. Additionally, defendants terminated women who were more quickly than their male counterparts. They were fired more quickly, and this pattern continued to show a common practice and violations that were currently continuing. In sum, the defendants' discriminatory practices adversely affected women in compensation, assignment, promotion, and termination. Defendants failed to take effective steps to remedy or adequately correct its compensation disparities, despite its awareness that such disparities existed. Defendants' discriminatory practices continue to the date of this complaint. Now we're getting into the area of sexual harassment, so I again advise people with a content warning that this is going to deal with all the things previously mentioned, and this is the section that will largely be talking about that, involving sexual harassment, sexual assault, and a brief mention into the topic of suicide. So again, please be advised of that. Female employees almost universally confirmed that working for the defendants was akin to working in a frat house. That is a horrific way to describe a work environment, which invariably involved male employees drinking and subjecting female employees to sexual harassment with no repercussion. Cube crawls in defendants' offices were common, and male employees proudly came into work hungover. Similarly, male employees would play video games during work, engage in banter about their sexual encounters, talk openly about female bodies, and make numerous jokes about rape. I don't really feel like that needs to be elaborated upon about how wrong that is. Unfortunately for these employees, it seems that that's something that they weren't aware was a problem to talk about in the first place, let alone in front of their women that they work with. That said, the men that they work with should have been equally upset at such topics, considering it's degrading to talk about other human beings in such manners. As a product of this frat boy culture, women were subjected to numerous sexual comments and advances, groping and unwanted physical touching, and other forms of harassment. That is infuriating, and that is something that unfortunately occurs far too often in businesses like this. One of the things to note is that this company, from what I was reading, is about 80% made up of men and 20% women. That is already an environment that could be potentially hostile for a number of reasons, given disparities between gender. However, in this instance, it is much more apparent that these are going to a much more extreme level and is very much an issue. Physical touching of this sort clearly should not be happening, and that is something that I wish was more obvious to more people. This is unacceptable behavior, and I am glad that the state of California is responding. Now, a female employee noted that random male employees would approach her on the defendant's work site and comment on her breasts, which is just completely inappropriate. Female employees working for the World of Warcraft team noted that the male employees and supervisors would hit on them, make derogatory comments about rape, and otherwise engage in demeaning behavior. This behavior was known to supervisors and indeed encouraged by them, including a male supervisor who openly encouraged a male subordinate to buy a prostitute to cure his bad mood. So in a blatant example of defendant's refusal to deal with a harasser because of his seniority and position, Alex Afrasabi who will be mentioned again, the former senior creative director of World of Warcraft at Blizzard Entertainment, was permitted to engage in blatant sexual harassment with little to no repercussions. During a company event, an annual convention called BlizzCon, Afrasabi would hit on female employees, telling him he wanted to marry them, attempting to kiss them, and putting his arms around them. This was in plain view of other male employees, including supervisors, who had to intervene and pull him off of female employees. Afrasabi was so known to engage in harassment of the females that his suite was nicknamed the Crosby Suite, which is actually miswritten here. It's supposed to be the Cosby Suite, after alleged rapist Bill Cosby. Now, I want to take a brief moment to step back before I continue the rest of this and talk about the fact that they actually have images of some of the staff at this so-called Cosby Suite. Kotaku actually covered this, where the instances of the frat boy culture were very much shown, where they showed off a lot of the drinks that they had. There was commentary of day zero preparations made in the Cosby Suite in effect, including tons of bottle of drinks, including alcohol, it appears, at the very least. And in all of this, we have a conversation between them for the BlizzCon Cosby crew, where one employee says, "I'm gathering the hot chicks for the cause. Bring 'em," is the response from Afrasabi. Stockton, another employee, says, "Greg, you OTW, you're on the way. You can't marry all of them, Alex. I can, I'm Middle Eastern," which I don't even want to go into the fact that that's already problematic in and of itself. "You misspelled fuck," is the response. "At Hilton Bar, come up to the cause." And this was all done in 2013, when a lot of the sexual assault allegations against Bill Cosby were already quite well known. And this is what they had responded to each other. And so this is the environment that they created at this so-called Cosby Suite in the hotel, where they actually displayed an image of him as well. And they all posed for said photo with that photo. And it's this is what they are allegedly doing in a lot of this. And this is what a lot of the women were in fact complaining about, and a lot of the men hopefully were also complaining about, given how many of them were speaking out against this and are continuing to see issues with this. Now they claim that it was a joke and all that, and they push it back, but this is not a joke. This is not funny. Given the allegations and given everything else, this is the kind of joking, quote-unquote joking, that ends up making a lot of these environments hostile. None of this is something that should, again, be taken as a joke. And as we come back to this, Afrasabi would also call females derogatory names at company events. The conduct of this employee was known to Blizzard Entertainment's executives, who took no effective remedial measures. Clearly, it was known about because there was documentation. J. Allen Brack, president of Blizzard Entertainment, allegedly had multiple conversations with him about his drinking and that he had been too friendly towards female employees at company events, but basically gave him a slap on the wrist, i.e. verbal counseling, in response to these incidents. Subsequently, he was asked to continue. He continued to make these unwanted advances towards female employees, including grabbing a female employee's hand and inviting her to his hotel room and groping another woman. In a tragic example of the harassment that the defendants allowed to fester in their offices, a female employee actually committed suicide while on a company trip due to sexual relationship that she was having with her male supervisor. The male supervisor was found by police to have brought in a butt plug and lubricant on his business trip. Another employee confirmed that the deceased woman involved had been suffering other forms of sexual harassment at the office prior to her death, specifically at a holiday party before her death, where coworkers were alleged to pass around a picture of her vagina. And this is the kind of stuff that is in this document and what is going on. And this is the level of harassment and type of environment that these supervisors allowed to transpire in the company and the executives were well aware of. And so in all of this, between the lack of pay and everything else, there has been this lawsuit against Blizzard, and rightfully so, assuming that all of this is indeed happening, and I firmly believe that it is, for a number of reasons. Now, it's worth noting that Activision Blizzard provided a lot of publications, including The Verge, a response to the lawsuit immediately after, where they deemed, quote, irresponsible behavior from unaccountable state bureaucrats that are driving many of the state's best businesses out of California. So, of course, holding these companies accountable for the sexual harassment, holding them accountable for the racism and sexism in their companies, is apparently driving these companies out of business in the state of California. And honestly, if you can't practice your company's business without having sexual harassment as the norm, without sexism and racism as part of your practices and providing equal pay to people, then maybe you really shouldn't be in business. And given some of the labor disputes that are going to come up in the rest of this video, it is worth noting that this company is in fact going against a lot of good practices and is trying to prevent unions from forming as well. We value diversity and strive to foster a workplace that offers inclusivity for everyone. There's no place in our company or industry or any industry for sexual misconduct or harassment of any kind. We take every allegation seriously and investigate all claims. In cases related to misconduct, action was taken to address the issue. Well, clearly not, given what was put in that lawsuit, and given that people who did ended up leaving the company because they didn't get their grievances responded to, and that the people involved were allegedly getting slaps on the wrist. Now, the department, the DFEH, included distorted and in many cases false descriptions of Blizzard's past. So they're denying it. They started off by denying this. We have been extremely cooperative with the DFEH throughout their investigation, including providing them with extensive data and ample documentation, but they refused to inform us as to the issues they perceived. They were requested by law to adequately investigate and to have good faith discussions with us to better understand and resolve any claims or concerns before going to litigation, but they failed to do so. Instead, they rushed to file an inaccurate complaint. So this all goes into them denying it and denying it and denying it. You know, we put tremendous effort in creating fair and rewarding compensation packages and policies and creating good business culture. It's all the kind of corporate nonsense that I expect to come from a company like this, while they're trying to deny any of these accusations and to just put a good faith letter out there that basically denies any wrongdoing. However, since the lawsuit was revealed, at least 5 former Blizzard employees have come forward on social media to corroborate the details, including the cube crawl, or that they had to deal with sexual harassment, or that it happened to people within the company around them. And so a lot of this was, again, put out there to be happening to employees currently and to happen to former employees who left the company. And the fear is, of course, that a lot of them might be targeted. So like The Verge put out there, I am also not going to put out any of the documentation without permission, but it is in fact stuff that has been put out there on the internet. Now, this one letter was leaked, and one person on Twitter had mentioned that they got this from a contact in the company, and it seems to be anonymous, so I am going to read this. This was the response to employees as opposed to the response that they put out to the public. I personally have a lot of emotions coming out of yesterday, and I know you do too. The allegations and the hurt of current and former employees are extremely troubling, except they just put out documentation stating that none of it was really real and that it was all false accusations. I know many of you would like to receive more clarity. While I can't comment on the specifics of the case of an open investigation, what I can say is that the behavior detailed in the allegations is completely unacceptable. So we're not responsible, but this type of behavior in general is not responsible. We're not, it's not responsible behavior, and we're condemning it and all the other legal nonsense that is generally put out there. Iterating our culture with the same intensity that we bring to our games is imperative, with our values acting as our North Star. This is some of the most important work that we do both as professionals and human beings. This company, jargon is just the kind of nonsense that they put out there to make themselves look like they are actually being decent people. It's the kind of thing that often goes underreported when people in business suits get away with a lot of the stuff that they do, whereas people who don't have that kind of corporate clout get targeted. And again, it's this type of business environment that creates a lot of that, that false professionalism that diverts a lot of this attention away from those who actually are committing a lot of the bad things that we've talked about, a lot of the negative things that we've talked about. The leadership team and I will be meeting with many of you to answer questions, discuss how we can move forward. In the meantime, I want you to know that you can talk to any manager and HR partner, which again has totally worked out for people in the past, or to any one of the executive team members. If you feel more comfortable talking to someone outside of Blizzard or prefer to be anonymous, you can contact this. Basically do anything but come out to the public, which people did, and I'm grateful they did. And in response, a number of employees came out and made the following demands on the company. Given last week's statements from Activision Blizzard and their legal counsel regarding the lawsuit, the subsequent internal statement from some people and the stories shared by current and former employees, we believe that our values as employees are not being accurately reflected in the words and actions of our leadership. As current employees, we are holding a walkout to call on the executive leadership team to work with us on the following demands in order to improve conditions for employees and the company, especially women, and in particular women of color, trans women, non-binary people, and other marginalized groups. And I am genuinely grateful, given that a lot of these legal documents tend to synonymously call women females and all of that, that this specifically, the employees of the company broke from that and actually referred to women of color, trans women, non-binary people, and other marginalized groups within their statement, because oftentimes a lot of this gets conflated and a lot of it gets pushed to the side. But trans women and non-binary people are in fact affected by a lot of what we've talked about, and it often goes underreported and ignored based on the language of these types of legal documents. So I am very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful that the employees, again, have come out in the name of all of the people who have been targeted in this way. Now, an end to mandatory arbitration clauses in all employee contracts, current and future. Arbitration clauses protect abusers and limit the ability of victims to seek restitution. So, again, that's protections for people who commit abuse, and that needs to be removed. That's the basic claim there. The adoption of recurring interviewing and hiring and promotion policies designed to improve representation among employees at all levels, agreed upon by employees in a company-wide diversity and equity and inclusion organization. Current practices have led to women and in particular women of color and transgender women, non-binary people, and other marginalized groups that are vulnerable to gender discrimination not being hired fairly for new roles when compared to men. Again, that 80% to 20% statistic that I mentioned earlier is evident of that. And within that, it means that they want to have an oversight committee made up of employees to make sure that employees are being hired a little bit more equitably. Publication on data or relative compensation, including equity grants and profit sharing, promotion rates, salary ranges for employees of all genders and ethnicities at the company. Current practices have led to an aforementioned groups not being paid or promoted fairly. So again, they want to make sure that all of the data of salaries are available. One of the things that most companies do to prevent any sort of equitable treatment and to create this kind of disparity between employees is to make sure that employees do not reveal their salaries. Some people even have non-disclosure agreements into contracts. And this is why a lot of these labor disputes and union union struggles end up being very important, because one of the first things that needs to come up is how much people are being paid. Because by actually talking about how much we're paid, we can actually talk about and demand higher salaries for those who are being pushed to the side and pushed to the margins in terms of these types of economic situations. So demanding that these salaries are made public is an important part of this labor dispute. And their last demand is to empower a company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion task force to hire a third party to audit of the reporting structure, HR department, and executive staff. It is imperative to identify how current systems have failed to prevent employee harassment and to propose new solutions to address the issues. So basically bring in another company to make sure that they can go over the harassment cases and hold any sort of HR and executive staff accountable. And again, having an internal company deal with that leads to a lot of these types of cases where maybe people are being given slaps on the wrist, like we potentially saw in this particular lawsuit. And these demands are not unreasonable at all, and in fact are important for labor organizing. Well, we got two different responses. This was the response from the CEO to the employees, and the other one was, one response, rather, sorry. The response to the employees was basically that this has been a difficult and upsetting week. I want to recognize and thank all those who have come forward in the past and in recent days. I appreciate your courage. Every voice matters, and we will do a better job of listening now and in the future. Again, this is the same corporate jargon. Our initial responses to the issues we faced together and to your concerns were quite frankly tone deaf. It is imperative that we acknowledge all perspectives and experiences and respect the feelings of those who have been mistreated in any way. I am sorry that we did not provide the right empathy and understanding. No, they're not. They basically had their employees call them out, promote all of this, and because they went public with it, and because employees have threatened to walk out in response to this and to make demands, they are backpedaling because they are fearful of the fact that they might form a union or might actually walk and do something else. The company needs its employees, and again, they are backpedaling based on the camaraderie of employees, and that is something worth noting. These companies do not care if they can continue to get away with these practices. They're not going to make an effort unless employees stand together. And when they do so, that is when companies backpedal in this way. As we saw from the previous responses, it was basically another slap on the wrist. And for the public, it was basically, this is irresponsible. How could the government have done this? This is bad practices that's just going to make it so that companies like us leave California. But again, when the workers actually stand up and formulate a group together, that's when they backpedal. We will do everything possible to make sure together we improve and build the kind of inclusive workplace that's essential to foster creativity and inspiration. I have asked the law firm WilmerHale to conduct a review of our policies and procedures to ensure that we have to maintain the best practices to promote a respectful and inclusive workplace. Sorry, WilmerHale, not WilmerHale. WilmerHale. And WilmerHale is something that will come up again as we talk more about this. But this has been the response. And again, what they decided to take, the following actions that they decided to take was employee support. We will continue to investigate each and every claim and will not hesitate to take decisive action. To strengthen our capabilities in this area, we are adding additional senior staff and other resources to both the compliance team and the employee relations team. We are going to add listening sessions. We know many of you inspired ideas on how to improve our culture. Of course, company culture, including safe spaces moderated by third parties for you to speak out and share areas for improvement. They're going to have personnel changes. We're immediately evaluating managers and leaders across the company. Anyone found to have impeded the integrity of our processes for evaluating claims and imposing appropriate consequences will be terminated. Hiring practices. Earlier this year, I sent out an email requiring all managers to ensure that they have diverse candidate slates for all open positions. We will be adding compliance resources to ensure that our hiring managers are in fact adhering to this directive, and in-game changes. We've heard the input from employee and player communities that some of our in-game content's inappropriate. We are removing said content. And the only thing that I was able to find that they actually removed is they changed the name of a single NPC in World of Warcraft, I believe it was, and that is, quite frankly, not enough. Well, the employees responded back. And on the evening before our employee walkout, Blizzard leadership released a statement apologizing for the harm of their response. And while we're pleased to see that our collective voices, including an open letter, have basically been heard, we are convinced that leadership that they have convinced leadership to change their tone about communications. The response failed to address the critical elements of the heart of the employee concerns, specifically an end to forced arbitration, worker participation and oversight in hiring, the need for greater pay transparency, and the employee selection of a third party. Meaning that they basically didn't answer any of the demands and basically put out a fake apology. Now, the group that they hired is also worth noting, but it's not mentioned here, but again, I will address that near the end. Today's walkout will demonstrate that this is not a one-time event that our leaders can ignore. We will not return to silence. We will not be placated by the same processes that led us to this point. This is the beginning of an enduring movement in favor of better labor conditions for all employees, especially women, including those who are women of color, transgender women, non-binary people, and other marginalized groups. We expect a prompt response and a commitment to action from leadership on the points enumerated above, and look forward to maintaining a constructive dialogue on how to build a better Activision Blizzard for all employees. So they did indeed walk out, and on screen is an image of said walkout, where they were all around that. And the internet actually came out in support of the walkout, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see this. A number of current and former members of Blizzard ended up coming out and speaking out against it. You also had people who were in other studios come out and share their support. And you had a number of YouTubers, a number of esports teams come out and support this. A number of Twitch streamers came out and support. And a lot of people actively chose not to play Blizzard games, to basically set up a virtual picket line and to not stream a lot of these games on the 28th. And that was, again, a very pleasant surprise to see such a group come out in favor of these employees and to come out against this form of inequitable pay, sexual harassment, and racism that a lot of the employees are experiencing, as well as things like transphobia and other such things that employees are experiencing based around gender discrimination. This is a really good thing to see. And in all of that, I do want to spend some time talking about WilmerHale. Kotaku put out a great article today talking about this. WilmerHale is the same law firm that helped Amazon prevent its workers from unionizing. And given that they are consulting this particular company, we should be concerned, given that there seems to be a move for members of Blizzard, the workers at Blizzard, to consider unionizing or organizing themselves as part of this effort. I think one of the things that really needs to be considered by these employees is if they can get the capital together to try to consider the option of forming some sort of co-op based company and leave Blizzard behind. I don't know how feasible that would be for these employees, given a lot of the different circumstances, but if they can get some of the funds together and start to formulate their own company and start to form a co-op, that would be a counter to Blizzard and a lot of these other developers. That might be a thing to consider, especially because a lot of these companies do not have an interest in changing at all. Now, WilmerHale, again, is worth noting because they are one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. They are a combination of two different law firms, Boston's Hale and Dorr, founded in 1918, known for representing the U.S. Army's pro bono in the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s, as well as Nixon in the 1974 United States v. Nixon. Then there's Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, founded in D.C. in 1962, where the founding partner Lloyd Cutler served as an advisor to Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, and founded the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law in 1963 at the request of President John F. Kennedy. So they have a rich history in the U.S. and a lot of its strong structures. Again, it's a big, powerful law firm, WilmerHale, that takes on powerful clients. Lawyers from the combined firm were part of the special investigative committees hired to look into the finances of Enron and WorldCom. And Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering represented Swiss banks accused of profiting from the Holocaust, as well as German companies accused of exploiting forced labor during the Nazi era. So again, these companies have a long, long history, and they have specifically in recent times come out as supporting Amazon in its anti-union services, and this is the company, again, that Blizzard has hired in order to deal with this particular case. And when we look at the stocks of Activision Blizzard, it is very much worth noting how this trend goes over the past few days. Before the walkout was announced in full force, the company, in fact, went up in price. It took no hit during that time until the walkout was announced, meaning that the lawsuit itself was not enough to put any lack of faith in the company. It's only when the employees started to walk out that the price of the stock dropped by several dollars. And so what that tells me, and what that needs to be analyzed as, is that the sexual harassment was not an issue for investors. That as the state of California put in this lawsuit, it was not in any way, shape, or form an issue until the employees banded together and decided to speak out against what was wrong and what's going on here. And that's when you see this price drop, as you see on screen. Now, this little spike back up actually happens when they announce and when the public information comes out about the law firm that they selected. And while the price has dipped back down over the course of the time since then, since yesterday, it's worth noting that that spike up happens at the exact moment they select their law firm and it's made public. And that is the problem with what's transpiring here. The only time that a company is going to get affected by these things, the only time that sexism and racism, transphobia, and all the types of harassment that we saw are going to be addressed and affect the company's bottom line is, in fact, when employees band together and when they work together. That is the only time that happens. And when they find a way, these companies, to stand up to employees coming together, that is when stocks go back up in price. And that tells me a lot about the nature of a lot of these systems under capitalism. The perspective that a bunch of employees were being harassed doesn't in any way, shape, or form affect the bottom line of these companies. And that's worth noting as well. And that means that at the end of the day, these companies are not in any way, shape, or form going to change their behavior. This is going to be a continued practice in a lot of companies like this. And this one struggle is great to see happening. And it's great to see this industry coming out in these particular ways. But it needs to be more. It is really a lot of the parts of capitalism and the way they incentivize this behavior, where a lot of the men at the top of these companies end up getting slaps on the wrist based on their employment and position, and where a lot of these companies do not prioritize women at all in the workspace, no matter what background women come from. And that, to me, tells me a lot about the nature of what's going on here. And it's something that really does need to be examined more as we talk about issues around capitalism, feminism, and labor rights, because these do intersect with each other immensely. And in this particular case, a lot of these women who got pushed out of the job lost their positions, lost their pay, and can't participate in this union, which they have very much a right to do so. Because they've had to move on to other companies, potentially taking less pay, getting less respectful jobs, and having to do other things. And this, again, is because of hostile environments that are alleged to have occurred in this lawsuit. And that is, again, part of this. Feminism and labor rights need to be examined together. And this is just the start of a long conversation to happen when it comes to gaming companies like this. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notification. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.